The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, Active Shooter Armed Assailant Response, presented by our sponsor, Heffernan. We're so happy you could join us. My name is Amanda Ramatar, and I will be your moderator today, and I will also be monitoring questions you may have during the session. Before we open up the session, let's review a couple of key items. All of the webinar materials we discuss can be found at the URL currently showing on your screen. I will be sharing this URL in a follow-up email, so don't feel like you need to write it down right now. If you have trouble with your internet connection during the webinar, we recommend leaving the presentation and logging back in. We do not control the audio, your devices control the audio. So if you have audio difficulties, try adjusting the volume settings on your device. If a telephone line goes dead during the call, hang up and call back again to the same number. If all lines go dead, watch the on-screen chat box for an alternative call-in number. Feel free to ask questions or provide feedback by using the chat box or questions box during the webinar. If you are using a tablet, you may need to tap on the screen for the options bar to appear, then you can select the appropriate option. We may not respond immediately, but we will work your questions or feedback into the presentation. If we can't get to your comment or question during the session, we will be online afterward to respond, or we may follow up in an email if we run completely out of time. You may also email us at moderator@aspenrmg.com for up to 48 hours after the webinar. This will be a 1-hour presentation. Questions and comments are very much encouraged throughout, and the presenters will be answering questions at the end. And lastly, we have a number of upcoming webinars covering a variety of topics, including those listed at the Heffernan website. In addition, we offer the mandatory preventing harassment training in English 3 times a year. With that, let's begin today's webinar, Active Shooter Armed Assailant Response. Our presenter today is Dr. Steve Albrecht. Dr. Albrecht is a trainer, author, and consultant specializing in complex HR issues and security concerns. He holds a doctorate in business administration, an MA in security management, a BS in psychology, and a BA in English. He is board certified in HR, security management, employee coaching, and threat management. He has written 24 books on business, service, leadership, security, and criminal justice subjects. Thank you for being with us today, Dr. Albrecht.
Thanks, Amanda. Good afternoon, good morning, everybody, for your time and attention today. Thanks for that. I'm, as usual, discouraged by recent events that have happened in Buffalo and also in Laguna Woods in California, the church shooting there, and also the grocery store shooting in Buffalo. I'm discouraged but not defeated. I have been working in this arena of workplace violence prevention since 1992. My claim to fame, if I have one, is I wrote the first book on workplace violence back in 1994, a book called Ticking Bombs. I interviewed a double murderer in that book, a guy that killed 2 people at work in San Diego. In my career, I've interviewed 3 workplace violence perpetrators in prison. I'll share a little bit about their beliefs and how that kind of drives our conversation today. We have some poll questions we want to start with. The poll questions are just kind of a kickoff to give me a sense of where you are and your agency in terms of this subject. Amanda, do you want to read those? My screenshot's kind of small.
I apologize, yes. My company or agency has a workplace violence prevention plan. Yes, no, or I don't know. And we usually like to wait till we have about 70% response from our attendees, and that's when we'll usually close the poll. So, all right, perfect. So we have about 74%. I'm going to close it and read the results. We have 44% that say yes, 26% say no, and 30% say don't know.
Okay, next one.
My company or agency has shown some version of the Run, Hide, Fight video to employees as part of a training program or staff meeting.
So you may have seen the Department of Homeland Security video or some other versions. I have one today, which I'm going to talk about, and I'll show it to you as well from Cal State University system.
One coming in. All right, perfect. We're about 72% voted, so I'm going to close the question and share the results. 34% say yes, 47% say no, and 19% say don't know. We'll go to the last question.
Thanks.
Does your company or agency have a threat assessment, emergency response, critical incident, or crisis management team? We have about 60% who voted. Almost there. Perfect. So I'm going to close the question now. Share the results. 44% say yes, 37% say no, and 19% say don't know.
Okay, thanks, Amanda, for running the poll. I also wanted to say thanks to the good folks at Aspen Risk Management. Steve Thompson and I have been colleagues for a long time. Also Phaedra, and thanks to the good folks at Heffernan Insurance for the sponsor of this program. When I look at your results to the polls, a couple things come to mind. Most organizations have some version of a workplace violence prevention plan that is now built into their policies. And if you look at this subject, it has kind of become mature, like sexual harassment, racial harassment has become a mature issue since the passage of the Civil Rights Act in '64. Most organizations, if they're on the ball, they should have some sexual harassment prevention program, a training program, a response program, an investigative response, and then consequences for the perpetrators and support for the victims. When you look at this subject of workplace violence, prior to Columbine in 2000, the mass attack at Columbine in the high school in Colorado, we did not have really an organized discussion about these issues. And so, unfortunately, based on what you are seeing in the news recently, and the fact that these things continue at workplaces, schools, colleges and universities, hospitals, malls, the sense that this subject has now unfortunately become mature as well. Many organizations have a workplace violence prevention plan. It discusses things like consequences and discipline and weapons in the workplace and what our response is as a leadership team, to include things like access to an employee assistance program, counseling services, security improvements, things like that. So for those of you in the 30% category, take a look at some of your workplace violence or your workplace policies to see if there's a workplace violence a policy mixed into your HR policies, your P&P manual for what your employer is asking you to do. So maybe contact your HR representatives and say, what do we have that's connected to this issue? Especially as a supervisor, you may want to know about these things as a training discussion, as a coaching issue, or you may be involved in a threat assessment involving a current employee, an ex-employee, or domestic violence involving an employee. That's one of those shadow issues, the last one, DV involving an employee, where the perpetrator that shows up has some sort of relationship with the employee, and the employee is desperately trying to keep that relationship from crossing over into the workplace. I'll use the female pronoun because it's most often, in my experience, female victims and male perpetrators. We have same-sex sexual orientation, DV, but it's pretty rare to have male victims and female perpetrators. So when I look at her response, she's fearful of being fired and also fearful of being killed. There's an anxiety connected to the off-the-job issue, which crosses over to work, which we must address as supervisors, managers, and leaders of organizations. In California, where I used to work, I'm in Missouri now, but in California, gas is much cheaper here. That's why I'm here. In California, we have Senate Bill 400, which requires employers to have a safety plan for employees who reveal domestic violence issues to them. And the safety plan happens at work and includes things like, moving the employee or bringing in private security or contacting law enforcement or doing something that as best as we can shields the victim from the perpetrator showing up to our facility. So if you look at around the country, there's only about 20 states or so, less than 20 states, that have similar protocols which say, we will fire domestic violence victims because we don't want that stuff in our office, which is, illegal in California, but happens in other states. So I'd like, the rest of the country to follow California's model when it comes to domestic violence and employees. So take a look if you have a policy and procedure manual that you can scroll through, do a search for workplace violence and see what comes up. Oftentimes it's couched under security, procedures, access control, how we let folks into the organization. It may be connected also to how we do discipline and termination. For the second, I'm going to show you a run, hide, fight video that comes from a really unique source, which is the Cal State University system. California State University system has done a really fine video, which I have shown hundreds of times in my trainings around the country, because I think it's better actually than the workplace violence run, hide, fight video that was done by the Department of Homeland Security and the city of Houston, Texas. If you put in run, hide, fight, DHS, city of Houston, Texas, that one will pop up. The bad guy looks like Vin Diesel. He runs around with a shotgun shooting at people. It's a little disturbing. I like the Cal State University one because it's empowering. It gives the same message. I think also younger employees resonate with it, and you could show it to your kids at your house, say 14, 15 years old and above. The last one, it does encourage me that some of you have said that your organization has a crisis response team, threat assessment team, threat management team, critical incident team, whatever they want to call it. This is where we gather, and for the rest of you, this is where we gather the safety and security stakeholders together. This could be IT, it could be facilities, it could be law enforcement, it could be security if you have that function in your organization. If you're a public agency, it's the city manager's office, the county administrator's office. It is the sheriff's department or the PD. If you're in the private sector, it'll be folks that handle corporate communications, people that handle corporate security, the leadership team that can make decisions at the VP or department director level and above. And in organizations that I mostly work in the public sector, the threat assessment team process is what we use for angry taxpayers, ex-employees, current employees, strangers that are threatening to our organization. That includes bomb threats and things like that, plus the off-the-job issue that's connected to domestic violence. I worked for the PD in San Diego as a sergeant and a domestic violence investigator. I handled 1,500 cases in my time there in 6 years. Most domestic violence victims work. This is a shadow issue we have to address. Sometimes the perpetrator is very well known to the victim. Sometimes it is a stranger. Sometimes there are political or terroristic reasons, as we saw in Buffalo, racist reasons. And so it's disturbing to me that these things continue, but we are not defeated. We'll continue our conversation. So here's some beliefs that people have about active shooters. They think that the perpetrators are invincible or unstoppable because they may be armed with long guns or semi-autos, or that they're wearing camouflage or vests or tactical gear. Just because I buy a cowboy hat doesn't make me a cowboy. When you look at these perpetrators, they're not Navy SEALs gone rogue. They're not Marine commandos gone bad. These are just dipsticks that live in their parents' basement and have access to guns. That doesn't mean that they're not fatally dangerous or they're not lethal, but we can stop these people oftentimes because we have the element of surprise. If they burst into a room which is dark and we are in there, we can tackle them and stop the fight. This has been done many times. We'll talk about this. The best first possibility is to leave the facility, the building where this perpetrator has entered. Get out with as many people as you can, co-workers, taxpayers, visitors, vendors, clients, customers, whoever it happens to be. Think about the folks that come to your facilities. Do they have issues of disability or handicaps, or they're small children or the elderly or things like that, where we have significant issues about how we move them quickly to safety. The second certain possibility is that we hide out. We shelter in place in the safest room that we can find: break room, restroom, conference room, supervisor's office, training room, someplace we can lock the doors. And then the third possibility is to fight back. And when we look at these perpetrators, they don't expect resistance, they expect compliance. The good news is the cops in the United States, all of them, have been trained in active shooter response. I've trained thousands of cops in my career. They know what to do when they get there, which is engage with the bad guy. Or bad woman. Women do this rarely, but it happens. And in these situations, you want to be out of their line of fire and line of sight so that you are safe from their issues with the perpetrator. And the other part is that the police response in the United States is about 8 to 10 minutes, and unless you live in a really rural area where it's tougher, the police are going to get there quickly and engage with the perpetrator, which is what the perpetrator expects. Many of these cases end by suicide or suicide by cop. When you look at number 2 there, the perpetrator knows he has about 5 to 10 minutes to kill as many people as possible before the police arrive. So if we are not in his presence, or we are in a locked facility, locked room he cannot get into, he will move on. They don't shoot through the door. They don't shoot the lock off like on TV. If they can't get inside, they keep moving. Many people believe that the police are going to show up and be able to recognize who the perpetrator is. That may be true sometimes. He could be wearing camouflage or black, tactical clothing with, night vision goggles on. Some of these guys are commando cowboys that get all this stuff. And the cops may be able to recognize them. But also, it's possible in a school environment or a K through 12 or college and university or another workplace environment where the perpetrator blends in. And we've had these cases where these perpetrators have hid out inside the room where people are hiding as well. That's happened in a couple schools that I know. So one of our functions is to tell the cops, tell the dispatcher, tell 911 what this person looks like and where he is going and the direction and clothing, things like that, so the cops can find him. Fourth, many people don't think or realize that these perpetrators have a target list. And the target list is, as you would guess, it's ex-boss, it's ex-supervisor, ex-HR representative, it's somebody who bullied or harassed or threatened the employee if it's an ex-employee issue. It's a broken heart. This person comes to the workplace and kills his old wife, ex-wife, or old girlfriend and her new boyfriend if he's an employee as well. We've had teachers targeted. We've had administrators targeted. Oftentimes these people will let other people go in an attempt to kill the people that they want to target. And so one of the issues that we think about for this subject, and it's a critical one, is how we treat people in the workplace. What is our level of empathy and patience and understanding and care and concern for every employee, every student that we work with, so we don't create this sense of revenge. And that is a huge driver for these perpetrators. It is probably the primary driver. And if I had to boil down my almost 30 years, coming up on 30 years now in this subject, I would say revenge is the most critical factor for these perpetrators. You broke my heart, you fired me, you kicked me out of school, you demoted me, you embarrassed me in front of these other people, you allowed me to be bullied, or you bullied me, things like that. Their driver is revenge. Last one. For this first set of 5, an alarming number of people that believe that lying on the floor and pretending to play dead will save them from being killed. This is not true. Fight back. Don't lay on the floor and hope this person's going to walk by and think that you're dead. They shoot people lying on the ground. Part of my reason that I became a cop in San Diego so many years ago was I was robbed when I was 15 years old. I worked at a little grocery store in San Diego. 2 guys came in, grabbed me and my partner and threw us on the ground and put guns to our head. And I thought, if I survive this, I'm never going to be in that tactical position again where someone has the drop on me like this. I'm going to fight back. And that's been my mindset for, since I was 21 years old. So when I look at this concept of hiding on the floor and playing dead, instead of evacuating, leaving the facility, or instead of hiding out in the strongest, safest building or room that we can find, or fighting back, that's what I would rather do. So many people believe that the perpetrator will not shoot through tinted windows or wooden doors. They will. They will shoot through parts of the building to get inside. They don't shoot the doors off like in the movies, but they do it oftentimes at the entrance. And one of the things to think about when it comes to entrances is this one down at the bottom here, number 11, which is give first responders your key card upon leaving the building. And this is critical. I do site security surveys of government facilities and private sector companies all the time, a couple times a month. And I will say, okay, how do we control access here? And people say, well, sometimes we have hard keys, sometimes we have key cards. Think of a box which is outside your facility, which is called a Knox box, K-N-O-X. A Knox box is a box that's mounted up on the by the front door that the fire department has access to. They have a key in their fire truck that they can open up the Knox box and they can get inside the facility without breaking down the doors because the keys are in there. Well, sometimes in the Knox box, we have the hard keys, the physical metal keys, but not the key cards. And the firefighters, paramedics, and cops can't get inside. So one of the things to think about is as you leave a facility in a real workplace violence incident, give your key cards to the first responders so they can get inside. We'll talk about that a little bit more. Also, many people think that the cops are going to be able to save them with first aid and things like that. They will not, because they're going to go after the perpetrator first. One of the most difficult issues in these scenarios is that the perpetrators shoot people and they bleed to death because the cops can't get to help them or take them out of the hot zone back into an area where paramedics can save their lives. We'll talk about the value in my world of tourniquets, and we are now putting tourniquets, or what are called stop the bleed kits, in with AED machines and first aid kits in organizations, and I'm a big fan of that. And I'll talk about Stop the Bleed as a 1-hour training program that you can go to that's taught by hospitals in your community. Number 8, some people still think that the sound of real gunshots is firecrackers or a car backfiring. Shouldn't be firecrackers or cars backfiring. We don't have catalytic, we have catalytic converters to prevent cars backfiring, and people shouldn't be throwing fireworks in your office. The sound of gunshots should urge you to move away from that noise and get out as safely as possible. Take as many people as you can with you. Number 9 is a real challenge. Many people in these workplace violence situations, school violence situations, didn't recognize the cops. The cops show up in tan uniforms, like in California, the Highway Patrol wears, and green uniforms. The Sheriff's Department wears green pants and tan shirts in California. If we look at cops in their plain clothes or tactical gear, black camo or green camo, or you got detectives wearing suits and ties and guys with ball caps and vests on, it is a chaotic response where lots and lots of cops from lots of agencies will come. Be ready for that. Could be green Border Patrol agents, blue customs agents. It could be plain clothes. It could be uniform. Could be railroad cops, could be college police. Lots of people will come to that event because they have a mutual aid response to it, and tons of cops are going to come to this. So be ready for the fact that the cops may not look like what they look like in your particular community. 10, most people don't understand the value of post-traumatic stress counseling, debriefing after these incidents are over. If God forbid you ever have that thing happen to your organization, go to the trauma counseling that is offered by your employee assistance program or by special health care mental health providers that are brought in to do these things. It helps you get back to a relatively normal life after these chaotic experiences have happened. So a couple things. You go to training like this to change your behavior under stress. During life-threatening stress, people may not remember what to do, and that's why I just use 3 little words: run, hide, fight. That's the concept to remember. Second thing, under stress, people don't dial 911 correctly. They look for an 11 on their phone. They can't remember the building address where they are. They've worked in the building for 10 years. They don't know what the street address is. Sometimes look at that 5th point there, or 4th point, when you call the 911 on your cell phone, your local highway patrol typically answers. In California, it's the CHP. Where I am in Missouri, it's the Missouri State Police. They answer, not the local sheriff or local PD. Now, you may have a different phone set up in your area geographically. Sometimes it's possible that you could get the sheriff or the fire department or the PD, but you may have to have a delay while you call over to get some emergency response. As such, if you have a choice, safety-wise, to use a landline or use a cell phone, use the landline. You can be directly patched through to the local dispatcher. They will know your address connected to the building as long as the phone lines are trunked into that building, and you can leave the phone off the hook as you get out to safety. A lot of people don't think about other ways to get in and out of their building. This is always the way I come in. I always go in the front door. I always go in the side door. What if that's blocked by the bad guy or the first responder? How would you get out of your facility if you're on a different floor? If you're above, stay above the perpetrator. If you're below, leave the facility. Don't move down from a safe location down to a dangerous location. And we learned that from 9/11. The first choice you can make is to leave the facility. Don't stay inside and shelter in place if you think that you can get out before the perpetrator comes to where you are. The other thing that we've seen with these perpetrators, and this happens especially in schools, and it happened in a case that I interviewed one of the killers in prison. He pulled a fire alarm. We've seen that case happen in Florida at the high school that had the workplace violence incident where 17 were killed. That perpetrator pulled the fire alarm, and they'd already had a fire drill that morning, which he didn't know because he had not attended the class that day. And so my thought is, if you're in a workplace violence real situation and you hear the fire alarm, stay where you are unless you see smoke and flames, unless you feel heat on the door. I am not leaving a safe location to go out into an unsafe area unless I really see smoke and flames. And I'm not telling you to stay inside and get burned up, but I'm saying sometimes these perpetrators pull the fire alarm as a reason for what they do to get people out into the area where they can hurt them. So a couple themes for our conversation. These things are things you already know. I'm just reminding you of kind of the intensity of this subject. These perpetrators are there to kill, not talk. These are not negotiated hostage negotiation situations. We can see in the Buffalo incident that just happened a couple of days ago, the perpetrator thought about killing himself, but he gave up and was taken into custody. Oftentimes there is a suicidality attached to this. They shoot it out with the cops, or they kill themselves upon the arrival of the police. And that window of time is really, really short. These aren't 5-hour hostage negotiation things or SWAT incidents where, they talk to the guy through a bullhorn like TV. It's not These things happen very quickly. The start and the finish are usually very fast. You need to be out of harm's way or sheltered in place or ready to fight back. Lots of different cop uniforms. Tell your coworkers and staffers to be ready for that. Basic first aid training besides just CPR is very useful these days, especially when it comes to tourniquets. I have like 5 tourniquets. I have a couple in my car for car accidents. I have some in my range bag. I have some at the house. Tourniquets save lives. And what we see in these situations that people get shot in their extremities, tourniquets will save their life. And in the old days, we used to use goofy stuff like shoelaces and skinny belts and things like that. Those don't work. Get a tourniquet from Amazon. They're $10. You can get 3 of them for about $15. They have a tightening device called a windlass, and that can really tightens it down. You put it 2 to 3 inches above the person's wound, not around their neck, of course, but 2 or 3 inches above their extremity wound, and you tighten it down until they say ouch or the blood stops. And what we have in the United States is something called the Hartford Protocol, and the Hartford Protocol is after the shooting at the school in Pennsylvania where the little kids were killed by the perpetrator. The surgeons and the trauma specialists said, we need a new Stop the Bleed campaign for this country because people are bleeding to death in these incidents. So what many hospitals have created is called a Stop the Bleed program. And I think if you go to stopthebleed.org or bleedingcontrol.org, you can see in your local area who teaches this. When I was living in Colorado, I got the training in Colorado Springs, and it's an hour, and they come to your facility and they teach everybody how to use a tourniquet. And it's not, I'm not going to say it's fun, but it's kind of an empowering thing, and they don't show like bloody videos and stuff like that. I think it's useful. So I'm now telling all my clients to put tourniquets into their first aid kits, and the more staff knows how to use them, even better. Think about what may happen in your agency which is not connected to workplace violence. Somebody gets injured in a fall where they break a bone and they have a compound fracture with the aortic bleed. Somebody cuts themselves. Somebody has a car accident or a forklift accident or something happens in one of your yards. Tourniquet's going to be really useful. So train staff to give 911 dispatchers and the arriving police as much information about the perpetrator as possible, what he's carrying, where he's going, number of people shot, all those things are very useful. And so the issue there sometimes we have is sometimes people will say, well, somebody else must have called the cops, I don't need to. Now, we don't want everybody crowding up the phone lines, 911, but just because you think someone may have called the cops, if you don't know for sure, try calling the cops, and if you can't get through, then you know somebody else is doing it. Be prepared to fight. These are not Navy SEALs. These are people that we can stop. You and yourself and your colleagues will survive is the message that you want to say to yourself. If this person bursts into an empty room or a room where we're inside and it's dark, we use chairs, we use a fire extinguisher, we use whatever we can to tackle this person to stop them until the cops get there. So how do we manage our staff concerns and fears about this issue? We have policies, we have training. In my perfect world, and if I was emperor of the world, I would have a run, hide, fight practice day once a year. I just do the run part and the hide part. I wouldn't have to do the fight part, right? We just practice leaving the facility for 15 minutes or sheltering in place, locking down inside the facility for 15 minutes. I've done a lot of these drills once a year for my clients, but they're typically people that kind of think about emergencies. It's water departments, it's electricity folks, it's power plants and things like that. I'd like to see that for everybody. You have a hurricane drill. Here where we are in Missouri, we have tornado drills. We have an earthquake drill in California. I'd like to add on once a year just a run, hide drill. Can you leave the facility safely? Can you lock down inside the facility safely? As such, that's fine. Get back to work. See you next year, right? Second one, do we have special needs people in our facilities? I do a lot of work with libraries. Libraries have special needs kids, special needs adults, elderly, disabled, people that are not ambulatory, that we have to figure out creative, fast, safe ways to get them out to the street. Can we put them into an office chair and push them outside? Can we put them into a blanket and carry them outside? Can we carry them physically, a couple of us, something like that? We've talked about the intensity of the police response. We've talked about the value of scheduling at least a run, hide drill once a year. And we also talk about the value of having mental health resources if this should ever happen to your organization. This includes employee assistance program or access to psychologists who are trained in critical incident response. I've been trained, I'm not a clinician, but I've been trained in a model called the Mitchell model, which came out after 9/11. And I have done many debriefs with my clients after these situations, bringing along a therapist to help me with that part as well. It's very, very valuable. Okay, so let's look at workplace violence kind of 101. You may have heard of some of these categories here. OSHA has long captured this subject in their work, and statistically, they look at these 4 types here. If I had to guess, this is just me kibitzing here. I would think that we're going to make a 5th category, which could be related to cyber attacks, which certainly aren't physically violent, but they could harm organizations and people enough to shut the facility down. That may be category 5 one day. But right now we have 4, and OSHA keeps track of this, and these categories, as you might expect, are in the order that they are in terms of most likelihood. So category 1 is crooks. The motive there is robbery. Category 2 is people we provide services to. In category 2, the most common perpetrators are students and patients. Healthcare is a significantly violent place. If you ever talk to people who work in healthcare, have them tell you stories about Friday and Saturday night in the emergency room. I mean, we have armed security and armed officers in most healthcare, excuse me, most healthcare facilities these days because of the incidents that are going on. Certainly in category 2, it's K through 12 students, especially at the high school level, and also college and university students, ones that have been expelled or having significant mental health issues. Look at the in red here, these are the drivers for these things: revenge, anger, mental illness, and the desire for self-protection, which is, you have harmed me and I'm going to harm you, and I need this gun to do it, and if the police show up, I'm going to shoot it out with them. Category 3, revenge, is the typical motive for most current or former employees. They've been bullied, they've been fired, they've been demoted, they've been ridiculed. They have this strong sense of narcissism about their worth in the organization, and when that gets cut loose, they become revenge oriented. And category 4, if you took a poll of every woman listening to this conversation, and I said the first part, when it comes to the possibility of domestic violence, if I can't have you, every woman would say nobody else can. Those guys are wicked dangerous. I have worked in domestic violence response for many, many years, and I am significantly concerned in threat assessment cases when I find out that the potential perpetrator had a sexual relationship with the victim. That is the cutting line. That's the dividing line, the border between harm versus not harm. If the employee who's a female is being bothered by some goofball that gives her weird presents and follows her around the workplace and shows up in odd places, I'm concerned. But if there's no previous sexual intimacy or spouse relationship or cohabitating or parents of a child, I'm less concerned. This is what researcher Deborah Jenkins called the intimacy effect, which is previous sexual intimacy between the victim and the suspect raises the stakes of violence dramatically. If I can't have you, nobody else can. Those guys are super dangerous, and I pay really close attention to how we manage those cases using all of the police and HR and mental health services that we can to keep the victim safe. So if you look at these 4 categories, it is most common category 1, then category 2, then category 3, and category 4. Now, I would argue that category 4 is underreported because most victims are afraid of telling their bosses or HR or anybody about what's happening to their personal life about the potential for domestic violence. And I really have serious concerns, and I'll be speaking about this later at a conference this year, about how much domestic violence we saw during the pandemic and people working from home, that this went unreported. And it concerns me, seriously, that these folks may have been abused in these situations, but didn't tell anybody because they were afraid of what might happen and also not wanting to reveal it to their employer. So I belong to a group of other paid paranoids just like me, called ATAP, the Association of Threat Assessment Professionals. We have about 18 chapters around the United States. We have a chapter in Canada and Australia and Europe and Asia. We focus on workplace violence, domestic violence, school violence, stalking, and terrorism. That's the things that we focus on. We've been doing this since about 1992. So we have about 2,500 people around the country. It's cops and security people and prosecutors and probation and parole and psychiatrists and psychologists. It's HR professionals. It's investigators. We look at researchers. We look at workplace violence, school violence, domestic violence, stalking, and terrorism, with the idea that many times workplace violence perpetrators are on what we call a path, and they move from ideas to actions. And you can see this path almost always starts with some kind of grievance. I'm angry at you or the organization or the school or the football coach or my parents or whatever it happens to be, or my ex-girlfriend or ex-wife. And then I get a violent ideation. Well, we've all had these. They last for a fraction of a second. Guy cuts me off in the freeway. I'm like, oh, if I had a cannon in my car, oh, look, coffee, right? And then you're back to the real world, right? But for these people, the violent ideation is a crossroads, and they move to the next level, which is they start thinking about planning and researching for an attack. We saw these behaviors in the Buffalo perpetrator. He went to the facility, pre-attack preparation. He was inside the store. He was asked to leave. He had been there a couple times before. He had worked in a grocery store. He kind of knew things about that. Then he showed up and did what he did. The only good news about this model here is that we have de-escalators. And de-escalators are oftentimes how we treat people. Can we intervene in school bullying? Can we intervene in workplace bullying? Can we change how people are treated from an HR perspective in an organization so that they're treated with empathy and patience and dignity? Can we create a soft landing for people who are terminated? And we can escalate things in terms of how we treat people poorly, especially in the workplace situation, or especially in the school situation. We can de-escalate based on the use of security devices, key cards, alarms, camera systems, physical security officers. We can de-escalate based on a response by the police that show up for small and large threats and investigate them and enforce consequences. Somebody says something, that person is talked to by the cops. You know, if I wasn't, if I had my way, I might go home and get my rifle and shoot up everybody just to see what happens. Ha ha. Right? We fire those guys. We come in and we have the police talk to them, and we put consequences to that behavior. Those are de-escalators. Now, the escalation part, again, we don't often know and can't stop these people who are really committed to doing what they're doing. That's the tough part about this issue. After I watched the Las Vegas massacre, where I think 59 people were killed, I became super discouraged, because it's like, we can't stop these people who are committed to do this type of damage. We can only be as aware as possible and reinforce the run, hide, fight concept to everybody. So why is the issue? And I just did some media stuff the other day about this: disconnected, disaffected, depressed, driven to act, desire for revenge, desperate, dangerous. These perpetrators have what's called the broken bridge of self-esteem. I don't care for myself, and I don't care about anybody else. There's early psychopathy. It's usually diagnosed before age 18, which is when typically it's diagnosed. They're narcissistically entitled. They're suicidally depressed. And then the toughest part is they don't have any regard for themselves or other people. I want to outdo my idols. I want international attention. And the Buffalo guy, his face is around the planet 15 minutes after we discovered who it was. I want to be infamous, right? Lady Gaga is famous. These guys are infamous. You can only kill me once. My actions will live on. This is what they believe. They have heroes. They make heroes out of the Columbine guys and the church shooter in Texas, and some of these other people are their heroes, and it's sad. I don't blame social media for this stuff, but I wish social media and the general media would not cover these people by name and face so rapidly. Why give them the attention that they want? So here is a treatise. Here is how would we say it, a manifesto, a description from some of these perpetrators. I've lived a depressed, disconnected, disaffected life with no real job, girlfriend, supportive family structure, or goals. Bad sign, right? Because of this, I hate people, and they seem to dislike me. I've collected the many injustices directed at me my whole life. And the injustice collector, their favorite phrase is, "It's not fair. I'm getting screwed. It's not fair. Life sucks." That's what they say. Now I'll kill as many people as I can for my revenge. I'll dress like a commando. I'll mimic my idols who have killed before me, so people will remember me and talk about my actions for decades. The guy that did the Buffalo shooting will impact that community for the next 10 years, guaranteed. I'll post my words, photos, or videos, manifestos, racism things of my discontent online to provide proof of either my irrational life views, religious zealotry, racial hatred, my active and untreated mental illness, and my rage against the world. I know the U.S. and international press and instant social media will expose me around the globe minutes after I'm dead or in jail, because that's what they do. I wrote this. I had a couple of cocktails one evening, and I said, what is the best conglomeration of all these guys that I have looked at for the past 30 years? This is it. Seems pretty close to what we've seen lately, yeah? So let's look at the workplace and say, are there things that we see in the workplace that would give a reasonable person concern? Is this employee troubled or troubling? Troubled means something's bothering them. Troubling means they bother people. Are they angry, depressed? Depressed people are dangerous. And who are they dangerous to? Themselves. Do we see any religious zealotry, connection to terror groups or racist groups? Do we see this injustice collector? They're hypersensitive to being slighted. They have a brittle personality. Do we see any evidence of substance abuse? That is an enabler for people to use violence, drugs, and alcohol. Are they the victim of bullying, which is much more likely for violence? other significant off the job or life problems that they have, divorce, financial, marital, children, death in the family. And then look at the one that says acquired to practice with a firearm. Lots of people have guns. And that doesn't mean they're dangerous. What it means is I bought a gun and I'm going to bring it in on Monday. And you say, well, how come? And you go, well, you'll see. Those guys concern me, right? People that have no interest in guns suddenly become interested in guns or go and get one and practice with it and then leak out that information. And then besides injustice collector, the biggest one up there that really concerns me is people who talk about workplace violence or school violence cases as if it were a good thing. Yeah, that guy in Buffalo, he took care of business. That's not an empathic human response, right? That's crazy. When we hear people talk about stuff like that as if it were a reasonable thing to do, I get seriously concerned. That is not what normal people do. Normal people are empathic and say, that's horrible, and what do we need to do to take care of the victims and help the families? Not, gee, that was great. These people that talk about workplace violence or school violence cases that have happened as if it were a good thing demand our inspection, demand that we look at what they're all about, and we confront them and contact them and confront them about what they have said. Other people are concerned. And then the last one up there, this idea of third-party threats. They are moving from ideas to actions, and they have leaked, and that's an important concept. A critically important concept in this knowledge is they have leaked information to somebody else. It's a manifesto, it's a tweet, it's a conversation they've had with somebody. They've leaked what they're going to do to a family member. And here's the biggest learning lesson about leakage. It is not ever directed at the target. It's usually directed at somebody else. They don't leak to the target. The guy that says, I'm going to kill you, who's angry at his boss, I can put a fence around that guy. But with the guy who says, I'm going to shoot my boss to a coworker, that's a concern to me because they leak to a third party. And the challenge we have in schools and in the workplace is to get people to tell us about this leakage. So here's the run, hide, fight video you may have seen. This is the guy that looks like Vin Diesel. It talks about the run, hide, fight categories here. You may have seen this one. I like this one, the Cal State University system. You can see this cartoon here. It's animated. If you put run, hide, fight, Cal State University, you can see this video. So I'm going to try to play it for you. We'll look at the run, hide, fight part. We'll talk about cover, which stops bullets, and concealment, which does not. And we've talked about the value of a 15-minute drill. So what's the chances this thing works perfectly? We'll see.
This may be the most important video you will ever watch. We hope not, because for that to come true, you would have to be involved in an active shooter incident. While the likelihood of finding yourself in an active shooter incident is small, the risk is real, and these situations are happening with increasing frequency on college campuses and elsewhere. Our objective is to help put you in control of the outcome. Everything we discuss in this video can be summed up in 3 words: run, hide, fight. But first, what is an active shooter? An active shooter is someone with a gun attempting to kill people in a confined, populated area. For you, that means someone with a gun on campus who wants to kill. The purpose of this video is to give you the tools and confidence necessary to survive an active shooter attack. How will you know when an active shooter attack is underway? Know that gunshots don't always sound like they do in movies. If it sounds like a gun or even firecrackers, consider that it may be an attack. Do not wait for confirmation. Do not seek a second opinion. If it sounds like gunfire, it's gunfire. The same goes for screaming. While screaming doesn't always indicate danger, it may be a reaction to something terrible. Keep in mind that police are minutes away, not seconds. You must fend for yourself during this time. You cannot wait for the police to arrive. You cannot wait to act. If you are inside a building, use any way out available, including emergency doors and windows. Keep closed signs don't matter now. All options are available to you. Always be aware of your surroundings. Identify your options and make a plan. By the time an attack begins, you should already know where to run. Look for exits now, so you won't have to during an attack. When the time comes to run, leave everything behind except your phone. Everything. Just thinking about what to bring is time wasted. The most valuable thing you have is you. Grab yourself and go. Get yourself to a safe place. If you are outside, run away from the attack zone. Don't stop running until you are certain you are away from danger and in a safe area. When running, try to make yourself a more difficult target. It might be slower, but it could be safer. Don't turn around to see what's happening behind you. It is unlikely that the shooter is chasing you, but either way, slowing down to look for the shooter is not a smart strategy. Once you are out of immediate danger, dial 911. Tell the dispatcher there is an active shooter and your location. Do not assume someone else has already called 911. Yours could be the one call that saves lives. If you think it's too risky to leave your current location, hide. Active shooters seek easy targets, so don't be an easy target. It's that simple. An ideal hiding place would be a room with no windows and a locking door, but that option might not be available when the time comes. Turn off lights and shut the blinds. Make it look like the room is unoccupied. Even partial darkness helps. Choose cover over concealment whenever possible. Concealment is something like an office partition. It will hide you from sight, but it will not stop a bullet. Cover is something that will do both. Heavy wooden doors, file cabinets full of paper, and objects of this type should always be your first choice. If possible, barricade doors behind you, even if locked. But try not to make unnecessary noise in the process. Be silent. Turn your phone to silent. Disappear. Shooters don't waste time exploring rooms that look unoccupied, trying to break down locked doors, or searching for hiding students. Once hidden, be prepared to stay hidden a long time. Stay calm and be patient. It may take a while, but the police will eventually find you and lead you away from danger. Again, the time to look for places to hide is not after the shooting has begun. It is now. Wherever you are on campus, be aware of your surroundings and ask yourself, where could I hide if it happens? What are my options? Does this classroom have a closet? Does the door lock? What could I use to barricade the door? If no other option is available, defend yourself. You might not think of yourself as a fighter, but others just like you have surprised themselves with how effective they can be when fighting back was the best option for survival. The attacker has at least one weapon, and you do too. Look around. Chairs, textbooks, backpacks, rocks, pens. You have more options than you probably thought. One readily available weapon is a fire extinguisher. You will find them in nearly every hallway. You also have surprise on your side. The attacker is not expecting armed resistance until police arrive. This is your advantage. When you fight back, your goal is to overwhelm the attacker and minimize their ability to use weapons effectively by limiting their vision or physically disabling them. And with others nearby, weakening the attacker will give them confidence to join the fight. Lastly, when you fight back, don't stop too soon. Fight until the threat is over. The number one job of the police is to stop the attack. This means they are totally focused on neutralizing the shooter. Keep in mind that active shooters look like anyone else, even students like you. So when you exit a building, raise your hands to show the police that you aren't holding any weapons. You don't want to be mistaken for the attacker. Remember, just as you are afraid, the police are on edge too. They need to be ready to take immediate and decisive action. So your behavior is critical. Hands in the air. Avoid sudden movements. Obey police direction. The police will shout orders. They don't have time for courtesy. They must act quickly and forcefully. Do what they say for everyone's benefit. Like we said, the police are there to stop the attack. Once that job is done, they will turn to helping. Let's talk about helping others. This may be the most difficult decision of your life, but the best thing that you can do may be just to run and get help. Remember, most active shooter incidents begin unexpectedly and end quickly. Help is on the way. If you can remember run, hide, fight, you have the most important knowledge needed to survive an active shooter attack. Familiarize yourself with your environment. Plan ahead. If you are prepared, you will be able to run, hide, and fight without hesitation and with confidence. Please share this video, not only with your fellow students, but with family and friends. The active shooter threat is not limited to your campus or to any public place for that matter. This could be the most important video you ever share. Thank you for watching.
Thanks everybody for watching the video. I think it's empowering. I think it makes good sense for younger employees, certainly college students. And I think if you feel so inclined to show it at your house, 14, 15 years old and above, it would make sense for that environment as well. So you can see the things they've talked about: run, hide, fight. Cover stops bullets, concealment hides you. Concealment is things like drapes and curtains and blinds and tinted glass. And if we can, in my perfect world, do that 15-minute drill once a year, just the run and hide part. So we use, I'll wrap up here with these things. We use the run, hide, fight training points to reinforce to people what needs to be done in a highly unusual, highly chaotic, and fortunately pretty rare event. But it's happening more and more these days. If you can't evacuate safely, where are you going to go? Where's the next place to go if that room's not available? And it says down there near the bottom, don't freeze or panic, think and act. That's why we had this conversation. If you have an HR manual, do a little word search for workplace violence, see what comes up. If you're in the HR function or you have access to security function in your organization, talk about what kind of updates you need to make to the workplace violence response that you have. How does it connect to the active shooter policies, to emergency evacuation? Take a look at the first aid kits in your facilities and start thinking about adding in tourniquets as well as AED machines. So when we look at this concept, a safe room is not a perfect place to be. It's a place to barricade and to be as long as the cops can come and rescue you. We've never had any of these perpetrators impersonate the cops. So you'll hear from what the cops are wearing, their clothing and their jingling equipment and their radios that they're going to be there. And that second point there, excuse me, we talked about the fire alarm response. I would stay inside an active shooter situation if I heard the fire alarm unless I smelled smoke or flames. We've not seen that type of incident happen as well. So far anyway. Law enforcement response is going to be aggressive, but they're not going to help with first aid. You may have to do that yourself or get people out to where they can be worked on. That may involve carrying them, pushing them in chairs, things like that, whatever you can do. So the safe room concept is the best thought process we have. It's maybe an unusual place to be, like a restroom, and you can lock the restroom doors and stay away from what's called the fatal funnel, which is the doorway. The law enforcement response to these things is going to be immediate and aggressive, and they're going to need your help, especially with the key card access, if you can get that to them. In terms of fighting back, I've seen people do miraculous things under life-threatening stress. I've seen, college campuses. I've seen students tackle people. I've seen high school employees do it. I've seen people do it in the workplace. I'm not asking you to risk your life, but I'm saying I will not. If it's me personally, I'm not going down without a fight, and I will fight back for as long as I have to until help arrives. So there's a couple things that we need to think about. One is that we don't assign a, quote, safe room. This is where we go if there's an active shooter situation. Why? Because the perpetrator may be a former employee or a current employee, or may have some knowledge of our location. So we don't say this break room is our safe room. What we say is go any place, employee, where you can be safe. The second thing is, and this is a big controversy with my first responder pals, especially the fire department, which is we don't stage. Okay? Don't go outside and stand by the flagpole. Don't go outside and stand by the dumpsters. Don't go outside the building and stand in some part of the parking lot. Leave the area completely. If the perpetrator is armed with an assault weapon, the velocity distance of some of these bullets could be up to a quarter mile. We don't want to be near the facility at all, and we don't want to get in the way of the first responders. They're going to be coming barreling in, and there's going to be parking issues and exit and entrance concerns. You need to get out of there. If you can get in your car and drive away, even better. Second point there, some of these perpetrators engage in targeted violence. Co-workers, bosses, former domestic partners, things like that. We need to pay attention to even gossip as a workplace issue. I pay attention to gossip as a threat assessment thing. What are we hearing in terms of this leakage? Again, cover stops bullets, concealment hides you. We prefer brick walls and steel doors and things like that. If you don't have that stuff, then concealment is the best you can do until help arrives. So look at the left-hand side of the screen. Excuse me. The left-hand side of the screen is pretty good stuff inside the safe room. Lockable door, windows, or no windows, one way in, one way out, not three doors. A sturdy door frame, you can shut the lights off. You can use things to barricade desks, copy machines, things like that. There's blankets and first aid supplies and maybe a phone line. Right-hand side, not so good. One of the toughest environments I work in for workplace violence active shooters is healthcare. Nurses and doctors will not abandon their patients, and they will not leave the healthcare environment, so we teach them how to shelter in place inside the place they are and use access control in emergency rooms and patient rooms and things like that. So when you look at the best possible scenarios, just get away from the door, get on the floor, turn the lights off, and be as quiet as possible. I have seen locked doors be held at bay by people wrapping things around the doorknob, belts, ID lanyards and things like that, and just pulling the door shut so that the perpetrator can't pull it open. If you can wrap things around the door closers up at the top, even better. So last little thing here in terms of our final reality check for this scenario. Again, I'm discouraged but not defeated. I will go until my last breath to try to fight back against these perpetrators. We've been doing a lot of threat assessment for decades in this country. A lot of it goes unnoticed, and we stop things that people don't hear about. But as we saw in the Buffalo case, people fall through the cracks. This guy got talked to by somebody, either clinicians or the cops back, when he was in high school, and somehow he did what he did. And so I have to look more deeply at these cases as it goes forward. I'm sure the FBI is going to do a full report about this, which, I get access to this. It's oftentimes you can read these things as well to see what went on. These events are catastrophic and rare. The good news is the chances of this happening to you in your lifetime are quite rare. The bad news is it could happen at the mall, at the church you go to, at the grocery store, at the sporting event, at the high school, at the college where your kids are. Things like this, they're just keep happening. These are mostly lone wolf actors, male lone wolf actors. We have some female perpetrators, but it's pretty rare. One of the first cases in the United States happened when I was in high school in the 70s in San Diego. A girl named Brenda Spencer shot up the school. When we look at these perpetrators, they mostly use guns, and sometimes they may use edged weapons or even vehicles. We see a lot of vehicle stuff in Europe, people being run over in parades and parties and parks and things. And we also see a lot of edged weapons in Europe as well, which is a lot of stuff that's happened in China and Japan as it around knives and swords. No shooter has ever breached an open door or a secure door and come inside to kill people. No shooter has ever pretended to be the police. Pay attention to this leakage. We can't predict violence, but we can look at these pre-attack behaviors I talked about, this injustice collector, this narcissistically wounded, depressed person, and we listen for leakage. Our best approach: management vigilance, employee vigilance, rapid but measured responses, partnerships with our security stakeholders, including local PD, training plans, and drills, like things like this that you're coming to today. So watch the Run, Hide, Fight video every year at a staff meeting. Show it at home if you want to. Make sure everybody knows how to call 911. Don't evacuate to a staging location. Train people to make good conversations with the dispatchers as to what's happening. Know about your clinical resources, which is typically employee assistance program, or you have local providers for PTSD counseling and crisis response. And if you have the ability to meet with law enforcement, say, what do we need to do to protect our facilities? Get their advice and perspective. Once a year, if you can, 15-minute drill, run, hide. That would make me happy. Let me skip this part here. Okay, back over to Amanda for any questions. Thanks a lot, everybody, for your time and attention.
Thanks, guys. So we did have quite a few questions come in, and I'm just going to go over them quickly as possible. So if you do have a couple minutes to stay past 11, we'll be answering questions probably to the end, I'm assuming, right, Dr. Albrecht?
Yeah, and we'll stop the share back over to you. So you can put up your share screen if you want.
All right, let me get my little...
Okay, happy to get any questions for anybody.
Oh,
Sorry I went a little bit long there. I don't usually show the video, but I thought it was a good idea these days to show it. So most times I just make reference to it, but I thought it would be a good idea to show it.
Right. One moment, sorry. I have to write my questions on a different page. I think there were quite a few people who requested that the links to the videos that they saw would be shared with everyone. So if you're able to maybe send a link to me, I can put that in a follow-up email to all attendees.
Sure, it's easy to find. It's at workplace violence stuff. Just put in Run, Hide, Fight, Cal State University.
Okay, sounds good.
Stop the lead question. At what rate are you seeing cities start to train tactical armed paramedics? Yeah, I've seen that with fire folks as well, and paramedics. We're putting vests on them. We're giving them tactical training to go in with SWAT officers and things. And the only concern there is it's mostly happening in large cities, but not in smaller ones. Child-friendly videos to share. I use the Run, Hide, Fight one. I don't know any ones that are sort of better for younger kids. My concern, as yours probably is not to terrify little kids so they don't want to go to school, don't want to go to the mall. We have to be really, really careful there. Advice in the outdoor areas for parking lots and things, volunteers and patients. I think, you know, the key issue there is not to have them staged too close to the building. If you have to have them staged, make sure that there's like another building in the way, something we can use as a physical barricade between where the bad guy is and where these folks are. So if you have a campus environment, that oftentimes can really help. Amanda, did I miss one up at from these here?
No, I think you're good. I'm looking at our questions box, so we had a couple come in that I couldn't copy over. So I am a retired police officer and ALICE certified instructor. I work at a Boys and Girls Club. Do you recommend drilling with staff only or include children?
Yeah, I think the Alice Run, Hide, Fight response is fine. It's especially deemed for kids. I think you have to look at the kind of the workplace culture and say, does the staff want to do it with kids in terms of the drills, or do they want to do it by themselves? My thought is for kids, oftentimes is they have already been through lockdown drills at school, and especially K through 12 environment, you know, at least once a year, they're going through a lockdown drill. So this may not be unusual drill for them to do. If it seems like they have, you know, the maturity to want to go through the process with their adults at the Boys and Girls Club facility, that's fine. I just think you look at it and say, are we doing more harm? Or are we actually educating these kids? Or is there a sense that they will understand this because they've been through it before at their own school environment?
Perfect. All right. I think we got through all the questions and I think we're all set. So I'm just going to say thank you to everybody for attending today's webinar presented by Heffernan. We will send information by email with instructions on how to access a copy of the presentation on our website. And of course, thank you, Dr. Albrecht, for your time and expertise today. We hope everybody found today's webinar to be a valuable use of their time. So be sure to join us on June 7th for the Stress Management, Real Tools for Work and Life Balance webinar, also presented by Dr. Albrecht. And so thank you, everybody, and have a safe day.
Thanks a lot, everybody. Take care. Thank you, Amanda.